I'm an assistant professor of archaeology in the Department of Religion and Classics here at the University of Rochester, and I'm the resident Andean archaeologist. We just want to thank everybody for joining us today for the Voices of XR. This is a Mary Ann Maverick Studio X speaker series, which was made possible by Kathy McMorran Murray and the National Science Foundation as part of the interdisciplinary graduate training in science, technology, and applications of augmented and virtual reality. That is quite the phrase here. I would like to now introduce our speaker for today, my good friend and colleague, Dr. Giles Spence Morrow. Giles, would you like me to refer to you as Dr. Spence Morrow or Giles?
Oh, Giles is fine.
Giles is okay. So Giles is an anthropological archaeologist focused on the dynamics of state formation, social complexity, and human environment systems over the longue durée in the Andes. In 2019, Giles received his PhD from the University of Toronto, where his dissertation examined how the ritual architecture at the Moche site of Huaca Colorada served as a form of symbolic technology that unified communities across the southern Jequetepeque Valley of northern Peru during the late Moche and transitional periods. This is roughly between AD 650 and 950. And Giles, that was straight from your abstract of your dissertation. Giles currently holds a position as a postdoctoral fellow at the Data Science Institute at Vanderbilt University, where his research focuses on integrating emergent spatial technologies into archaeological fieldwork, using 3D recording techniques at various scales of investigation, ranging from regional topographic mapping using drones, site-level photogrammetric recording, to high-resolution 3D modeling of recovered artifacts using structured light scanning. Using these technologies will help to create immersive virtual reality models that will allow archaeologists to engage with spatial data in new and powerful ways, from regional area surveys to interactive photorealistic site and artifact models. These projects will produce public-facing and standards-based data sets, something we definitely need in archaeology, systems and analytics exploiting fully immersive room-scale virtual and augmented reality environments. Ultimately, these IVR models will allow archaeologists to re-experience the archaeological record, collaborate more extensively with colleagues, and refine interpretations at the cursor's edge. So I would love everybody to please join me in welcoming Dr. Giles Spence Morrow.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's great to meet you all virtually, and greetings from Hamilton, Ontario. So I just finished up my postdoc at Vanderbilt in January. So right now I'm a visiting scholar at Vanderbilt and also at the University of Toronto in the Archaeology Center. I've just returned from 2 months of fieldwork in Cambodia, where I was bringing some new drone-based LiDAR imagery into play. So that's something I'm processing now and hopefully will be incorporating into further research, so looking at a different scale altogether. So before I begin, I just want to recognize that if I were with you in Rochester today, we'd be gathering on the lands of the Seneca Nation, the great hill people and the keepers of the Western Door, and of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. And I take that opportunity to be thankful of being able to present in this territory. The research work that I conducted, most of this work, took place on the lands of Vanderbilt University, which was the ancestral homeland of the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Shawnee, and other native peoples who were forcibly removed to Oklahoma during the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And currently, the Mississaugas of New Credit here in Toronto, in the Toronto and Greater Toronto area of Hamilton as well, the dish with one spoon wampum. So many thanks to Studio X at the University of Rochester to be part of this Voices of XR speaker series, especially to Megan and Steph Bautista for the invitation to speak today. So it's a real pleasure to discuss with a great group of varied interested folks here. So it'd be wonderful to have some discussion after the fact. So this paper is a culmination of work that I conducted with Professor Stephen Wernke at the Vanderbilt University, and has been just recently published in the most recent issue of the Virtual Archaeology Review from the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia, Spanish journal, but it is kind of the leading archaeological applications in XR. So definitely worth looking at, from very technical papers to some more theoretical papers and applications based, as you will see today. So I will share my screen if I can. And let me know if you can see the slide. Is that popping up?
Yes.
All right, great. So the title here, Thinking Through the Tool, Collaborative Archaeological Bodywork in Immersive Virtual Reality at Montréal and Huaca Colorada, Peru, speaks to some of the directions we're going, not just necessarily looking at our virtual reality as a showcase, as a way to bring technology for technology's sake, but actually as a tool to work with the embodied aspects of archaeological research, which is really foundational to our field. So with the advent of very high resolution, three-dimensional 3D models via photogrammetric techniques as a primary method of archaeological documentation, the construction of immersive high-fidelity simulacra is imminently within reach. This paper considers how the scale at which the human body interacts with immersive digital models is especially important for understanding the affordances and ergonomics of past things and places. The implications of this isometry between archaeological objects of analysis and emerging capabilities to interact with them through digital surrogates in the present are manifold. By enabling interaction with object contexts in immersive virtual spaces, such observational experiences create in silico engagements that are repeatable, distributable, and collaborative. In particular, it is this collaborative capacity of this technology that we explore in this paper to the use of online immersive virtual reality. We use collaborative online VR as a key instrument for enhancing understanding and reinterpreting the digital records of 2 archaeological sites under excavation in Peru. Here you can see some of the manipulation from a first person's perspective of one of the sites in Peru. So our case studies present distinct cultural, geographic, and temporal contexts in the Andean region to illustrate the broad potential for VR, or an XR for archaeological hermeneutics, or how we think about what we're thinking. Through VR frameworks, we engage with embodied reconsiderations of Catholic ritual spaces within a planned colonial town in the southern Peruvian highlands and a pre-Columbian site of Huaca Colorada on the north coast of Peru. So synchronous scalar experiences that privilege the affordances of architectural space within digital models create opportunities for an embodied experience and collaborative dialogues. You see here too, my colleagues Stephen Berquist and Lindy Masser discussing while standing within a scalar model of one of these spaces. So we argue that the capacity for to digitally inhabit these places and manipulate the materials holds subtle but profound epistemological and hermeneutic implications for archaeological knowledge construction. It's not just a showcase, it is actually a tool in building interpretation. So immersive virtual reality enables interaction with digital surrogates of archaeological materials and spaces on multiple scales. Here's a fantastic model of Borobudur on one commercially available VR product called Blue Planet VR. Individual scenes, but really, really high quality productions in 360 spaces, really fantastic builds. So inspection of artifacts, examination of excavation strata, exploration of buildings, built environments, and landscapes are all imminently possible through VR frameworks, as we can see here, really quite convincing experiential moments. These digital interactions recruit distinct human perceptual and cognitive systems compared to 2D and non-immersive 3D representations. VR engages binocular depth perception and sensory motor systems by enabling physiological engagement with the entities represented, as the body of the participant occupies the same perceptual space as the phenomena of interest. In so doing, VR enables proprioception in the interpretive process, as the body itself becomes a vehicle for observation and knowledge production. Notably, the sensory, motor, and proprioceptive aspects of VR operate independently of scalar engagement. One example I'll give you here even in fields of study in which the objects of observation are radically different in scale from human experience. For example, protein crystallography, novel forms of knowledge and expertise emerge uniquely through corporeal interaction with intricate digital representations. In this field, Myers refers to the expertise that emerges from sustained body work itself and proprioception in relation to digital models of protein molecules as molecular embodiments. The enriched cognitive effects of VR is also attested by its demonstrated advantages in diverse applications and learning outcomes in training and rehabilitation, of which this community is very well aware. Thinking back to even the physical models of biological chemistry, organic chemistry, needing to think through these things by manipulating them is a part of that embodied understanding. So in the case of archaeological analysis and interpretation, we suspect that the scale at which the human body interacts with the environment are especially important for understanding the affordances and ergonomics of past things and places. So here we are standing within a model of a space, but in the same instance, moving through them and interacting with them creates a different experience. So there are multiple implications for how our understanding of the archaeological objects may be affected by emerging capabilities to interact with them through collaborative virtual reality venues. Primarily, VR enables interaction with objects and contexts in a shared immersive virtual space between multiple participants, extending important investigative modes of embodied consultation, debate, and consensus building. You see Dr. Warnke and I interacting together within this space, thinking through some of these various models. Finally, such engagements are repeatable. Secondly, the VR interaction in high-fidelity 3D archaeological contexts enable embodied observational experiences that are familiar to the primary process of observation and data construction during fieldwork. Finally, such engagements are repeatable and distributable, inviting remote access to stable digital surrogates of excavation contexts. We can come back to these places and continue our dialogue over time. As excavation is a destructive process, precluding recurrent in situ observations, the capability to create high-fidelity 3D models of excavation contexts and to repeatedly interact with them in ways that are phenomenologically congruent with the experience of primary observation, quote unquote, at the trowel's edge, holds transformative potential for how we describe and look back through these materials. These are vestiges that are recorded that need to be embodied and lived through to be able to be as meaningful as it is to the original excavator. So, further, we believe that the underlying technologies to produce virtual reality and XR in general have now matured to the point that they need not be the exclusive preserve of technical specialists, nor require expensive specialized equipment. In fact, high-fidelity VR environments and digital assets can now be produced with equipment that is far more cost-effective than traditional land survey instrumentation of total stations and laser scanners, for instance. Affordable consumer-grade digital cameras and even cell phones and iPads, tablets and other portable sensors can produce high-resolution models that can be brought into virtual reality. Yet, despite this fact, virtual reality largely remains in the category of a rather exotic or novelty add-on for most archaeological research. The fact that we're using this as a showcase rather than this discussion of a tool is case in point. We contend that it can be employed by large long-term projects with multiple specialists bringing it together. We contend that now even small-scale projects can readily incorporate virtual reality assets, production itself, management, and display into the workflows, and should be done so in thoughts of future directions. In this paper, we focus specifically on the implications of virtual reality for the construction of archaeological knowledge from two excavation contexts. Although this paper utilizes digital methods in the construction of these VR interactions, our aim is not to offer a technical workflow for the production of the models themselves, which has been covered in detail in a number of different papers, and also more akin to a workshop that I often will present as well to get students and collaborators working together towards these ends. In contrast, we use this opportunity to discuss the nature of an embodied virtual archaeology through VR in the setting of excavation context and its broader applicability in landscape scale and portable media scale research of artifacts. So in archaeological fieldwork, the human body and its perceptual apparatus are amongst the most important instruments of observation and interpretation. Though little remarked upon, much of the work of field-based archaeological interpretation originates in corporeal engagement with the ruins of built features through the researcher's tactile interactions with contexts, features, and artifacts in situ. But the tactile and physical interaction with archaeological contexts and the media that are being seen and felt is fleeting. The emergent understandings from which these engagements thereafter reside is in the excavator's memory and invariably represented in field notes, field forms, photographs, sketches, and maps. Thus, after the primary moment of observation in the field, much of the archaeological interpretation involves tacking between one's memories of the excavation contexts and the various textual, graphic, and quantitative representations that we create as the record. This process at once calls upon remembered experience while partially transforming those memories themselves through repeated review of documentation. Archaeology and anthropology more generally thus constructs knowledge through what is known as a quote-unquote double hermeneutic. It investigates the co-constitution of people, polities, and things in the past, even as archaeological investigation itself is mediated by the same kind of co-constitutive process between researchers and the representational technologies that are used to create these modes of observation. The history of archaeological techniques of representation might be characterized as a cumulative effort to improve upon schematic and data-poor representations toward increasingly detailed and data-rich ones, from simple sketches, drawings, to exact replicas using various different technologies. So within this framing, virtual reality models of archaeological excavation contexts represent a qualitatively distinct development, as they uniquely enable immersive interaction with 3D surrogates of features, spaces, and things at the environmental scale. That is, at the one-to-one scale of the original context of creation and use. So in this important sense, VR comes closest to simulating original field engagements with the archaeological phenomena under consideration. This essential feature of VR has a major implications for our ability to re-experience the places constructed and used by peoples in the past, and for revisiting those places as new knowledge and frameworks of understandings emerge. What you're seeing in this image here is 3 different excavation periods from 3 different years, all together at once, in one moment that I can re-explore in a way that is impossible to do so otherwise. So the controlled scale of the participant is of key importance to the overall experience of the setting. For example, allowing for immediate appreciation of spatial ergonomics between excavation units and stratigraphic profiles, and even lines of sight between and within model contexts, or even the broader landscape, as you'll see in some examples here from Huaca Colorada later in the paper. Additionally, the ability to manipulate the scale of the reference elements within VR environments provides enriched investigative and interpretive potential across the board. So as will be discussed in our case studies, the use of reduced scale models of the entire modeled settings, as you can see here, while standing within the full-scale version, provided participants a shared embodied understanding of a particular room within a complex architectural compound. Seeing from above provides you this rich springboard for conceptualization of spaces that does not exist in the experience itself. That's kind of moving in 2 directions at once. So the veracity of the photogrammetric models of archaeological settings is key to the sense of presence, as we talk about in XR literature, both in terms of scale and the level of surface detail. How present, how realistic, how immersed do you feel in looking at something? It's not jarring as a geometric solid. There are certain thresholds in morphological and textural sampling that are needed to achieve this concept of presence or degree of presence, with the texture quality of the utmost importance. Depending on the context, a relatively simple mesh overlaid with a high-resolution texture may suffice to bring the viewer into this sense of presence of the original context. In other situations, the complexity of the surface morphology itself may require a higher polygon count mesh to reach the same level of presence, and it really depends on your context and how much you can get away with in that particular model. The presentation of archaeological data through VR raises several curatorial concerns as well. So how VR data are maintained and made manifest to the participant within a virtual setting requires careful consideration with regard to information design and management. Traditional interaction with archaeological data through a consultation of site monographs, technical reports, and databases includes both narrative and exploratory modes of access, requiring logical presentation alongside the ability to query tables, appendices, original notes, etc. All of the media that is required of this type of research. GIS is often central to managing and analyzing spatial representations and attribute data of excavation projects. But it's also quite difficult to work with that in terms of a spectrum of complementary workflows and relationships between VR and these established modalities can be imagined, how you're working with these different forms. So simply standing within a high-resolution excavation model alone may provide the participant with a great enrichment of field notes or GIS-based spatial models. So here's a view of a site in Presa Kna in Cambodia, where I'm consulting the actual written report as a PDF at the same moment while standing in the models of the space itself. So it's sort of allowed, this kind of interaction allows you to tack back and forth between the narrative and other graphic representations. Marked features within a model with hyperlinks to other data sets can further enrich and guide the experience. Recorded narrative guidance by the original excavator can provide and still a similar, if not more nuanced understanding of a research setting. Live collaborative discussion within VR among colleagues can enable real-time discovery and interpretive insights. Just as an in-person site visit to an excavation provides important understandings of the excavation from an embodied perspective, we argue that the capacity to guide users in and through a VR model provides a unique interpretive and collaborative opportunities. Without question, the VR interfaces we discuss in this paper would be ideal venues for quantitative and qualitative data collection in the realm of user experience studies. However, this is beyond the scope and focus of the current study, and to the interpretive potential of VR within full-scale archaeological models. But there's a lot of research that can be done using this as the venue for further consideration. So during active archaeological excavation, here we are at Huaca Colorada in Peru, sampling an olla or a cooking pot and sieving through the materials that were found within it. During the active excavation itself, interpretation is emergent as excavators progressively uncover contexts. Understandings evolve and are revised as relationships between constituent elements, features such as pot, artifact distributions, etc., may be grasped within a larger whole as the excavation unfolds. You're seeing parts of the whole as you're building it. Project directors are often more limited in their tactile engagement with the excavation matrices and features in the field, as they rely on excavator observations while maintaining a panoramic view across individual excavation operations. You may be able to pop in and take some notes, but you're relying on the documentary evidence that is being recorded by the excavator themselves. So, subsequent to initial observations during excavation, interpretations evolve through the interaction of the memory of the excavator, aided by notes, maps, images, video, and so on, without ever coming into direct contact with the now destroyed primary contacts themselves. So you're relying on this data to create the narrative of what is known from this material. Traditional stratigraphic recording relies on the interpretation of the interface between materials excavated and the remaining in situ walls of the trenches. In this way, our interpretations are based upon material that is in effect not part of the excavation, but rather their presence in plans and profiles, sketches, tables, and notes. So if you're looking here, stacked photogrammetric models of superimposed excavation layers can be appreciated on the screen as 3D models themselves. But the ability to stand within them and peer through strata allows us to actually provide an embodied experience of the stratigraphic profiles that we argue can transform post-field archaeological interpretive processes. You're not basing it upon comparisons of two-dimensional representations. You're actually standing within them and peering back and forth through time. What you're seeing here is actually excavations that took place over 7 years, all in the same moment, all impossible otherwise. With the advent of VR models of excavation contexts, interpretations can be further refined and revised through repeated immersive revisitation of these digital surrogates of a context. Comparison of strata are usually based on changes in elevation or relative superposition rather than embodied experience of multiple phases at the same moment. Within a 3D model of each surface available in virtual reality, virtual cuts can be made through strata and made at any angle, enabling scrutiny of stratigraphic relationships that would be otherwise impossible to observe. So with the emergence of a very high-resolution 3D textured models, usually via photogrammetric methods, but also through various scanning techniques that are changing by the minute at the moment, as a primary method of archaeological field documentation, the construction of high-fidelity VR environments is now within reach for everyone who is in the field, essentially. If you're taking photographs, you have the capacity to make models. There's no excuse anymore, essentially. The advent of cloud-based processing of photogrammetric data through the growing number of commercial and open source photogrammetric software suites, quite a few, reality capture, Pix4D, drone deploy, recap, there's so many different versions now that either rely on software or cloud-based processing, has also facilitated the access to sufficient computational resources required to produce them. We're no longer tied to very, very powerful computers in order to work with our models independently. Although now widely produced, the modes by which 3D data are disseminated remain restricted. Given the large file size of high-resolution models and proprietary software and expertise often used to engage with these reconstructions, there are few user-friendly options that are available to easily examine the resulting data. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the fantastic Sketchfab, which is undergoing a bit of change at the moment. It's going to be turning to something called Fab, kind of more monetized to some degree. Is the Sketchfab platform itself, and it's sort of taken the lead in the cultural heritage sector as an accessible venue for hosting 3D models of objects and environmental material. So Sketchfab offers browser-based manipulation of uploaded models, the capacity to download data if given proper permissions, and most importantly, a relatively seamless integration with virtual reality hardware through the WebXR device API. So as a dominant 3D platform within the cultural heritage sector, Sketchfab is a useful conduit through which these data can be accessed and appreciated. However, there's relatively little the viewer can do with these data beyond consumption of interpretations via information panels, animations, and animated and embedded audio. So even interacting with these spaces in VR through Sketchfab is a unidirectional interaction with the 3D media on a screen-based, and the VR devices precludes the manipulation of orientation, of scale, apart from your positional scale, or note-making, image capture, or measurement with these spaces. Although you can see the spaces that are created in this sort of embodied form, the embodied experience themselves of the media within these digital environments are entirely solitary. And this is a major, the loneliness of the metaverse is quite something we can discuss later to some degree. The user can only observe the set environment or the objects by themselves. So from this perspective, interaction within collections through Sketchfab is museological in nature. This platform is not really designed for fully exploratory, immersive interactions, nor for synchronous interaction with other users. So it has its place. It definitely is a fantastic repository, but the collaborative element is something that is missing that we're considering today, as interpretation is by nature a collaborative endeavor. So massively multiplayer online role-playing games have an enduring presence within the VR medium, ranging from Fortnite and Roblox through Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and many other titles, which I'm not involved thoroughly with, that allow players to interact with detailed and very complex virtual worlds. And I highly recommend looking at Colleen Morgan's work on archaeogaming as a interaction between these spaces. So this familiarity of online disembodied interaction has been viewed recently and extended into VR platforms as optional hardware components for popular platforms such as PlayStation 5 and you name it. Generally, the bar to entry for these systems is relatively high, requiring considerable initial investment of both high-end gaming desktops and virtual reality systems. However, this is a changing field drastically. Lower budget options such as the Oculus Quest, the Meta Quest now, the Oculus Go before that, and other various phone-based options such as Google Cardboard, which we can all agree are pretty disappointing in the current situation, were widely adopted but quickly abandoned due to the limitations of the processors. So with the introduction of the MetaQuest 2 in 2020, this drastically changed the market, obviously, offering a low, cost-effective and relatively high-performance onboard processor. This movement to standalone VR processing has opened opportunities, yet has recently faltered in adoption quite wildly. Meta's investment in this creation of a singular commercial metaverse has been widely criticized. However, developments from Apple and other vendors with the eye on more inclusive augmented reality offers promising directions forward, yet there are certain barriers to entry, as we can discuss. So multiple options are readily available within hardware-specific applications, however, require all users to interact with material in a solitary VR in many cases, limiting the broad utility of the resultant data in a collaborative setting. There are multiple collaborative VR platforms that support the import of digital assets that we explored prior to choosing one in particular, which is called spatial.io, as our preferred venue for archaeological VR interactions. So, I mean, there's a Sketchfab itself, but spatial.io is one that we will kind of touting as an easy to operate, very user-friendly kind of version to allow us to get straight into interacting with the data instead of spending the time working with the complexities of Unity that build this model. This is kind of a venue for the material. So formerly a multi-platform system with interoperability between HTC Vive, Nreal, Microsoft HoloLens systems, this platform currently supports only MetaQuest VR products. They really threw everything in with Meta. The overwhelming dominance of Meta products in the consumer VR market limits spatial.io in some ways. However, the robust web-based desktop and mobile options for interaction creates by far the most user-friendly option available. Spatial.io was launched in 2019 and is a recent entry into this online VR space. It's designed as a collaborative interface, primarily for virtual co-working, meeting, and presentation, and has developed into a premier platform for artistic and cultural exhibitions. As a true open world environment, the flexibility of this interface is key, as participants are able to join a given space in VR if they have the proper setup, or on a desktop as avatars who can navigate within the 3D virtual audience spaces itself. So interaction with spatial.io through desktop and mobile platforms requires locomotion through mouse and keyboard controls. This is a gathering of educators that I took part in early on in 2021. There were no legs at that moment. We've since developed legs. It allows viewers to view the scene in either a point of view at a distance above the participants or through a modifiable perspective that brings a rich, if not fully embodied experience of the subject at hand. Through such a 2.5D experience of a given setting through the plane of their screen, as we're looking at it now, does a starting point prior to full immersion in VR. The participants engaging within the spaces of this browser-based format can manipulate all of the objects and media imported into the scene, albeit with less nuance and only in linear Cartesian space and planar observation, which I'll show you later. Here's an example of that interaction. True immersive interaction for those with the required VR hardware allow those participants to manipulate objects more naturally and from an embodied first-person perspective. Models in a variety of formats can be imported into the scene by any participant, manipulated, scaled, annotated, documented through both photographic simulacra and even as video capture from the VR participant's point of view, as I recorded this, my own view, looking back at this particular scene of the Cotton Club in Harlem. A history professor was able to bring us to the Cotton Club and discuss its importance as a locus of culture within that era. So although collaborative immersion is by far the most engaging format for which these models can be experienced, this platform also has the capacity to upload video recordings of guided first-person tours of contexts from the same virtual space, allowing participants to interact with the models while detailed explanations are provided at their own pace, for instance. So unlike many previous standalone VR applications that require a download as a single executable file, as a program that you'd have to run on your computer and put your headset on and experience as a standalone, spatial.io scenes are built within digital spaces that are made available on external servers. So to all users invited to a given setting, regardless of their mode of interaction, VR, desktop, mobile, etc. These spaces created by this form of server-based interaction are venues for real-time interaction. The users can experience these settings as the loci for natural interaction and manipulation of assets if the permissions are enabled by the creator of the space. This is my colleague Howard Tsai's space, where he incorporated a number of different vessels for students to interact with them and leave notes, and as a space for there is actually as a class space. So all changes made within a space are also maintained as they are left by the participants. Where Stephen Berquist lets go of that bowl, it will stay there until I come up and pick it up, or he moves it somewhere else. So it allows for continuous and evolving interactions over time through these imported media, notes, and in application photographic captures. You can say, this is a part that I'm interested in talking about. So these versions of the spaces can be saved at any juncture, and portholes can be created within the scenes, allowing users to travel to other digital spaces. The locational persistence of the assets imported into the VR setting is of vital importance in such an ongoing collaborative workspace, as this provides the users the opportunity to return to a given session of exploratory interaction. So examples that we'll talk about today, we can explore these implications of the availability of such collaborative VR platforms through two case studies, examining multiple excavation phases of research conducted at the planned colonial town of Mauchuyacta, excavated by Stephen Wernke, as you can see on the left of the screen, and Huaca Colorada, where myself and Edward Swenson and colleagues have been excavating on the north coast of Peru. Excavation of these sites took place between 2016 and 2022, with each research strategy employing photogrammetric documentation through each field season as a really intensive system of documentation. Previously, the resulting high-resolution three-dimensional models of multiple phases of excavation were used by both projects in the production of orthomosaics and digital elevation models within Project GIS databases, which were in turn used for digitizing vector-based graphics and registrations, all in essence to create the figures we see in 2 dimensions, more or less. We're creating using the complexity of the 3D data to compress it down into this very reduced form of explanatory mode that we're used to in publication. Additionally, manipulable and annotated 3D models were produced and made available through places like Sketchfab as embodied or embedded hyperlinks to allow reader interaction as a supplemental material, not as the material itself. It's always seen as this additional component that you can just, oh, how interesting, you can take a look at it. In 2016 and 2017, both of these two projects independently made initial forays into immersive interaction with these models in virtual reality, using early Oculus and HTC Vive head-mounted displays running on very expensive, very loud, very hot desktop computers. In both cases, the models were experienced at one-to-one scale and entirely as solitary experiences that could be observed by colleagues as a live point of view feed to external monitors. So you just over the shoulder, where one person is experiencing it, but not collaborative. These early VR experiments underline the interpretive utility of embodied immersive experiences. However, the limitations of the available hardware and the nature of software integrations required considerable initial effort to create relatively simple virtual environments. By 2020, the availability of cost-effective MetaQuest 2 headsets and the highly accessible spatial.io VR software platform allowed authors the most viable venue to revisit the models from a fully collaborative perspective. So we were previously working with Unity and as well as Unreal Engine to create these very complicated models that had to be made into a singular program, whereas this is very lightweight, and we can actually share these by way of a simple email, which is fantastic. So below, we present two case studies from very different geographic, temporal, and cultural context within the Andes to illustrate the breadth of the utility of VR for extending and enriching analysis and interpretation of architectural and excavation contexts. To this end, we first present the case study of the colonial period site of Mauchuyacta, followed by a second consideration of the Middle Horizon period Moche culture site of Huaca Colorada in the Jequetepeque Valley. So the town of Mauchuyacta, originally the Reducción of Santa Cruz de Tuti, also known as the El Espinar de Tuti, is located in the high reaches of the Colca Valley in southern highland Peru, in Cayoma province near Arequipa, at an elevation of 4,100 meters above sea level. So high altitude, very difficult to actually excavate in this area, let alone to build a city. This large gridded settlement, measuring roughly 500 by 500 meters, is an unusually well-preserved example of a planned colonial town, built as part of the Viceroyalty-wide forced resettlement program instituted in Peru by the Viceroy Francisco de Toledo in the 1570s. During this mass resettlement program, over 1.4 million indigenous and Andean people were compelled to build over 1,000 of these reducciones, literally reduction towns, built around central plazas, churches, and civic complexes. Traditional homes were raised and new ones were built within these reducciones. This audacious Reducción General de Indios, the general resettlement of Indians, was motivated by a normative theory of the built environment, which posited that the implementation of certain urban forms and spaces would generate proper social order, or policia, and compliant Christian indigenous vassals and tributaries, this forced resettlement, which is so familiar to us here in North America as well. With its unusual state of preservation, combined with a large corpus of related archival documents, Montréal affords the opportunity to document and analyze the built environment of a reducción in great detail. So intensive site survey and drone-based photogrammetry in 2013 and 2014 were followed by excavations in 2016. These excavations documented photogrammetrically, as you can see, these models that we're interacting with in spatial.io were all collected back in 2013 and 14 and 16. This resulted in hundreds of locus models and from 11 excavation units from all over the Tuti area. So resulting in hundreds within each of these excavation areas, a sequential stack of excavation models was combined using freeware Blender and exported in a variety of temporal orientations to allow for specific strata to be viewed in the same VR scene. A subset of these combined models were reprocessed with Agisoft Metashape Pro, the software using to actually photogrammetrically build the models from the photographs, and exported into the GLTF format. That's amenable for direct import into spatial.io via VR platform. Essentially, this GLTF or GBF format is actually kind of like the JPEG, very compressed version of 3D models, which is incredibly useful. So drone-based photogrammetric models of the entire site were also processed for import into spatial.io and served as the navigable scalar environment within which the excavation-specific models are situated. And so we're actually standing inside a model that was built from a drone image of the entire town. The experience of this intervisibility, by incorporating the site-level model, this larger model, within the VR scene, the experience of intervisibility between structures and their relative location within the local environment clarified the nature of the post-abandonment processes. You can see us here trying to explain two different phases of excavation within this. There's the collapse of the rubble wall and the excavation below. So as all the excavations at Montréal took place within spaces enclosed by standing walls of buildings, as you can see here, with a known general function, for example, domestic structures, church naves, the sacristy of the church, the rectory, we had a sense of what they were. In very different states of preservation. Knowledge of the state of the enclosing structures immediately clarified variations in depths of initial surface overburden. We're able to look at how the walls tumbled down, and once that was removed, seeing what the excavations were looking like. This is very difficult to describe through a series of photographs. So although I had never visited the site at that point, Steve was able to immediately bring me into up to date with all that information in a way that would be impossible otherwise. So where the models of excavation surfaces presented only as isolated floors, these relationships to standing architecture would not have been easily apprehended. Instead, consultation of aerial and ground-based photographs taken from specific angles and the close reading of site report entries would have been necessary to determine the wall heights to particular areas of excavation. In comparison to traditional text and image-based interpretation of site records, VR interaction within such a carefully curated space allowed for relatively immediate comprehension of taphonomic processes. How did this building collapse, and what does it mean about the preservation of the materials found thereafter? A particular note within this space, this allowed Stephen Wernke to guide me through a detailed recontextualization of each phase of excavation, highlighting notable excavation loci and the variable preservation of architectural features as a result of these depositional processes. A particular note And here's Steve and I actually going through on the other side of the realm in our lab at Vanderbilt, and how we were interacting within these spaces. So we're not necessarily at a distance within this particular space, but we very easily could have been. There's no barrier to location. So a particular note within these models was a rectangular depression on the floor of the church sacristy, adjacent to the chancel of the church. This stone-lined recessed area, as you can see, measured approximately 2.97 meters in overall length and 1.25 meters in depth in the wall, a space that was suspected to have served as the foundation for a vestry, a large bureau in which liturgical vestments were stored in Roman Catholic sacristies. This is a common component within these spaces. Because we have information about these church inventories from the late 18th and 19th centuries, they include narrative descriptions, including dimensions and construction details of almost every element of the church. They're keeping track of every candlestick, essentially. In terms of the church itself, the sacristy, the adjoining rectory complex, with detailed listings of sacramental objects and furnishings, including a vestry. So following the abandonment of the site of Montréal in 1843, the contents of the original church were relocated to a newly constructed church located 4 kilometers down slope in the modern town of Santa Cruz de Tuti. And a survey of the furniture in the new church, we actually found a chest of drawers that was long suspected to have been the original from the original church itself from the 16th century. So to test this hypothesis, a digital twin of the vestry was created in Blender based on photographs and measurements of the relocated chest. And when it was brought into the VR scene in the sacristy excavations in spatial.io, the vestry proved to fit perfectly within the floor depression. It's kind of giving you a sense of where this may have once stood. So digital relocation of this object to its original intended location provided the authors with the opportunity to reassess the assumed orientation of movable objects in the sacristy space, not an effort to fully recreate the lived experience of the room, but as a proof of concept in the capacity to think through the relationships of room orientation in a manner that'd be impossible in any other format. This kind of hermeneutic operation could be repeated on many other items in the church inventory as contents were transferred from the old church to the new one and remain there to this day. So one of the elements, quite apart from talking about taphonomic and object permanence, we can now move to thinking through some very complicated stratigraphic profiles at Huaca Colorada. So the site of Huaca Colorada is located in the Jequetepeque Valley of the north coast of Peru, dating from what we call the late Moche period, circa 650 to 950 AD. Directed by Dr. Edward Svensson of the University of Toronto and Francisco Seoane of the Universidad Nacional de Trujillo, from 2009 to the present day. The excavations of Huaca Colorada focus on a sequence of architectural reconstructions of a monumental adobe brick platform structure that served as a ceremonial stage for generations of religious performance. And so here I am moving through various different representations of maps and models of the area, the region, and the actual structure itself. The research at the site clarified that each phase of occupation was punctuated by a comprehensive renovation events that encased previous structures in a well-defined and complex stratigraphic sequence of overlaid floors, walls, and fill events. Broad horizontal excavations in 3 sectors expanded over each year of investigation, allowing for considerable cumulative stratigraphic relationship to be recorded. Beginning in 2012, all excavations were documented photogrammetrically, creating a considerable database of 3D models of the excavation contexts. The resulting models were used to relate stratigraphy between years, and by digitally compiling each model in a shared coordinate space, we were able to connect these different spaces over time. And here we are actually discussing the location of excavations for the previous year, which was the 2022 season in this case. Interactions within these composite spatial models served as powerful interpretive tools in the preparation of site reports and publications. Beginning in 2017, the capacity to virtually revisit the complicated stratigraphy once imported into Sketchfab and viewed through the HTC Vive we were using back then underlined the utility of the emerging technology as a viable archaeological tool. So subsequent to the collaborative and explorations of the data in spatial.io, project members allowed project members to compare the stratigraphic relationships between 2 contiguous research areas that were excavated in 2016 and 2018, during the planning for continued research in the same sector in 2022. Here you can see embodied the two different excavation areas that were actually excavated 2 years apart. So embodied interaction within these temporally separated excavations allowed for clarification of the relationship of continuous stratigraphic levels that provided difficult to connect conceptually from site reports alone. Based upon these collaborative interpretive sessions, the location of where new excavation units would be placed in the 2022 campaign were made. So we're actually standing and making these decisions as we are live. This spatial.io requires a stable internet connection to allow for interaction within the server-based scene. These are entirely online interactions. Review of daily progress was conducted in our field laboratory following the photogrammetric processing of our daily photographic sets. So there's nothing stopping us from taking the photographs in the field, bringing them back, processing them, and allowing a colleague overseas to interact with those ideas, which we did in fact do. So the capacity to constantly update the virtual reality scene and share the results online through throughout the excavation campaign itself allowed project collaborators in the field to virtually collaborate with colleagues in Toronto and Nashville in decision-making that directly affected excavation strategy. We're not doing this alone. What do you think of this relationship here, and making decisions on the fly, essentially? In concept, it would be entirely possible to use spatial.io in VR as a resource during active excavations with a suitable internet access. Although in this particular case, the remote location of the field site limited the connectivity to some degree, and quite apart from the harsh environmental conditions of blowing sand and strong equatorial daylight, and we're not really amenable to using the MetaQuest 2. It would be probably a one-day operation. This might change in the future as we are developing a new system that are more robust, much like the Apple Vision Pro, perhaps. However, in practice, excavation teams were able to use a mobile version of spatial.io to consult modeled scenes in a first-person perspective through augmented reality versions of the context as a valuable resource when required, pulling up particular models within a single moment. Versions of the context as a valuable resource when required. So upcoming hardware developments of field-ready VR/AR headsets would be of great opportunities for seamless interaction within these data sets. Although you're seeing from a disembodied perspective, a first person of me working with a version of myself, we're interacting with the stratigraphic profile on a very human embodied format. So given the photogrammetric models of every context were recorded during the process of excavation, project members were able to immersively consult particular components during the preparation of subsequent field reports for the Peruvian Ministry of Culture following the closure of excavations. This capacity to reinterpret and revisit a fleeting moment in time allowed excavators to revise notes, reinterpret relationships, and seek second opinion from colleagues who were never present on site. The capacity to compare temporally and spatially separated data in a fully embodied fashion fundamentally changes the way that a site is understood. From this perspective, in the future, making such data available in an immersive format could easily become a requirement in archaeological data management and a powerful mode of accountability within the cultural heritage community. Instead of a singular photograph of a context, and that's the only record necessarily, you provide the entire experiential context to anyone who needs it. So immersive virtual reality is now a viable interface for archaeological research and holds transformational potential in archaeological interpretation and knowledge production. We're no longer limited to Cartesian representations of archaeological spaces, nor even non-immersive subject-centered ones. So we may now discuss the subjective experience of archaeological spaces in real time with others, inspect and revisit spaces with new knowledge and investigative stratigraphic and proxemic questions at varied scales, even in ways that are not possible during fieldwork, bringing in two different disparate ideas together, comparing models of objects at the same moment. The rapid evolution of mobile VR has opened opportunities that are only limited by the quality of the software interface used to interact with these media. Powerful desktops connected via bulky headsets, via cable to bulky headsets, are no longer compulsory, although there are very high quality systems available. Previously, photogrammetric models could be brought into video game engines such as Unreal or Unity, loaded as a single program and experienced alone looking at Michael Carter's work and Gonzalez Tennant's work as virtual rosewood, fantastic products, but again, as isolated, singular moment. In these systems, projects were run locally, which tended to silo users apart from one another and limited the collaborative potential. The recent emergence of web-based multi-user platforms opens new avenues for collaborative interaction in VR within archaeology and overall. Of the options explored, the spatial.io platform was by far the most approachable and well-designed venue for synchronous collaboration between participants in a fully immersive settings. The user-friendly interface of spatial.io allowed for data to be introduced, inspected, and manipulated at various scales to a highly intuitive manner. The experience of virtual archaeological spaces through these platforms allows viewers to apprehend proxemics and spatial relationships within and across archaeological contexts in an embodied fashion that is qualitatively similar to the primary experience of being present at the site itself. A single session between researchers in such a collaborative space allows for a deeper knowledge of the context than by text alone, opening up a proprioceptive and experiential aspects of context that are not accessible via 2D and even 2.5D representational modalities through the screen as we are experiencing today. Full immersion in VR can be experienced. However, the flexibility of the user interaction via desktop and mobile interfaces provides various configurations of collaboration. Video or audio recordings of guided first-person tours embedded within spatial.io virtual environments allows participants to collaboratively interact with models while also watching or listening to such media as supplementary materials. From this perspective, future research directions will focus on the utility of spatial.io or similar programs as an interface for virtual class enrichment and how it may allow for the collection of expanded qualitative data, these new potentials and capabilities, and become new challenges. So these challenges include increasingly the 3D models are incorporated into project websites and extended digital media as hyperlinks within publications, but these representations stand outside of the embodied experience of the places and objects in question. So if a picture is worth 1,000 words, here we have two representations of a very famous Moche vessel. This is the presentation theme, an individual vessel itself, and on the other side. How you're interacting with this. What we argue, what is the capacity, the actual capacity to move through these? If we recognize the value of the embodied experience in archaeological interpretation, well, what is the other possibility itself? Here you can actually see interaction within it. We argue that the capacity to discuss and debate the experience of an archaeological space or artifact in real time in a high fidelity VR simulation opens generative potential for the emergence of intersubjective understandings that would otherwise not be possible. In this sense, we agree with Huget's critique of the overweening Cartesian mode of representation in archaeology, citing Donna Haraway's concept of the God trick, which, quote, sees everything from nowhere. Here, the potential is to produce a homologous phenomenal experience that of being in place within the context and the objects in the past, both the subject past and the moment of excavation and interaction. Moreover, within a collaborative VR space, perspective is rendered effable through the discussion and made mutable through active scaling of representations from the miniature to the environmental scale. In this way, one very much sees everything from somewhere. So this tacking back and forth through scale and experience is one that truly has no comparable representational modality. Within a VR space of archaeological excavation, we are able to collaborate with colleagues separated by great distance while concurrently consulting the same models, maps, and GIS data. In essence, through this technology, we return to the fundamental phenomenology of research spaces and the interpretation that occurs in these conditions. In our opinion, the capacity for VR in archaeology will rise to most of Huget, Riley, and Locke's so-called grand challenges, that it is fundamental, it addresses theory and practice, it is innovative, using technology specifically designed for archaeology. It is revolutionary, in that it's paradigm changing and with new technological competencies and ways of knowing, inspiring, engaging across the sector and beyond, and measurable with immediate goals to gauge progress and achievement. And most importantly, cooperative, involving more than just individual researcher or team, crossing national and potentially disciplinary boundaries. Lastly, the production of high-fidelity models attends to the ethical imperative that archaeologists document the perishable and non-renewable heritage that we destroy in the act of excavation itself. Though no substitute for conserving the original in situ, we argue that there are no compelling reasons not to undertake the photogrammetric documentation of archaeological excavation contexts, given its low barrier to entry and relatively simple technical requirements, especially for the photogrammetric data collection phase. It is through such measures, or more costly methods, such as terrestrial laser scanning, that high-fidelity simulacra of sufficient resolution for producing the ghostly presence of an archaeological things and the context can be rendered. So far from curiosities or novelties, the digital twins and VR present unique affordances for working through the double hermeneutic of archaeological reasoning, and therefore should figure centrally in archaeological field methods and post-field analytics and interpretation. So this is really just the beginning of a new dawning of documentation across the board. And I'd be happy to take any questions in the time we have left.
So people are joining us on Zoom. They could type their questions into the chat, but otherwise, anyone here could feel free to ask a question. I think, Giles, you have a view of the room, right?
I do, yes. I have a full view, yes.
Okay. So something that I was thinking about when I was reading through this work was, being able to do kind of like almost like a time loop, or being able to like look like through times there. It's say if we talk about like the development of like a small village or a town, then you could like see buildings kind of rise and like fall as you like kind of scroll through time. So I was wondering, have you ever put kind of any thought to maybe, I guess, because I don't know, I always think of all these documentaries where it's like, here's what this town would have looked like this many years ago, and like it'd be so cool to find a way to kind of superimpose that on top of these models and that kind of thing. I don't know.
Or like animation, like animating it over within spatial audio, I guess.
Absolutely, there's some fantastic work that's been done in terms of recreations of all of ancient Rome. You can walk through the streets of Rome as it is now, and this is kind of, this is a great function of these reconstructions and seeing, what was once in these locations. The specifics of this particular angle is literally looking at the minutiae of the archaeological experience itself. So creating a reconstruction is definitely the end point, but using this not as simply as a showcase of, this is our interpretation and this is our thoughts of the reconstruction. It really is about the nitty gritty of the archaeological question. So when Steph and I are crouching in a unit in Quilcapampa in Peru, debating over whether or not this ash lens overlays this ash lens, that's the kind of moment we can actually get to with these types of material with the extant data. If we want to build a reconstruction of the entire site after the fact, it's as easily as functional. So it's a combination of the depositional processes, which we're looking at as archaeologists, the interpretation at the trowel's edge that we're dealing with in the field, but being able to just flip a switch and turn on the reconstruction as well and think about it in that respect is incredibly powerful, and will change very quickly once we all have an AR set on our glasses eventually, once it's a little cheaper than $4,000.
Being able to recreate those kind of one-time experiences where it's you can't undig the hole terribly easily, but so being able to let other people experience that process that you can't walk back really is.
Absolutely. Being able to, one example at Vanderbilt, I've been running some excavations on campus at a site called the Vaughan Home. And the excavations themselves, we've been running for years now, and we leave QR codes that are attached to Sketchfab models that pop up in augmented reality. So you can literally point it at a QR code, and then the excavations from 2017 pop up in front of you in the same location as the models themselves. So this kind of idea we could even embed within the excavations or at a site tour in Peru or elsewhere, a model of what was there, which that location may no longer exist because it's been excavated through or completely buried again to preserve it. So there are opportunities to interact with this not only in the laboratory but in the field as well. And as augmented reality interactions through these different headsets improve over time, I will see this as being something incredibly useful, not just through mobile devices. Problem.
Anna, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So I'm thinking about the application this would have for rescue archaeology. And so I guess I'm wondering, when you're pressed for time, is it valuable enough, or would you make the trade-off from spending more time excavating to create the digital twin and have this site that will eventually be destroyed? Or I guess, can you comment a little bit about the applications in rescue archaeology or salvage archaeology?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the beautiful component. In traditional salvage archaeology, you'd still be recording the context. You would be doing this through photography, through stratigraphic profile drawing, which can take hours, and it's a painstaking kind of process. With the photogrammetry, you can create a model in as quickly as you can take the photograph. So even if you are incredibly pressed for time, if you're in a moment where you're battling the elements or a particular construction schedule, for instance, you can still take photographs in 5 minutes, process these later down the road, and have this document that is incredibly powerful. There's a bit of a tension in some ways in traditionalists in archaeology who say, well, you need to spend the time with the context in order to draw and understanding the materials, and really your interpretation is singular because you're the only person seeing it. Whereas it's a bit of a question in that you can create these fantastic digital versions very quickly for future iterations and future consideration, which in the end may save time and actually produce more detailed observations. Obviously, there is a moment to be considered in looking at the context themselves, but from a salvage standpoint, I would argue that this form of digital documentation is quite amenable to the movement through those materials, especially when you are pressurized for time for various reasons. Obviously, we'd love to be able to excavate at leisure, preserve and conserve every layer that we're working through. But as we know, archaeology is a destructive process in its nature. So it is kind of a question of conservation ethics, the site itself, and the timelines that you have. But it does provide this sort of setup does allow you to reconsider data that would otherwise be lost and not necessarily considered. You may decide not to document an intermediary phase because it does take time. In this situation, you're creating a model within minutes, allowing you to actually develop more data in some way.
I saw another hand go up, I think up here. Go ahead.
I was wondering if, because this mostly focused on how headsets actual the visual aspects of it, if there is future for items like what's the term, haptic suits, where you can incorporate touch into VR. Do you think there's a future for that in this field, or is that kind of limited by the data we have to make the models in the first place?
I mean, it would be fascinating in terms of, I mean, so much of it, as you mentioned, is tactile in archaeology, looking at the qualities of soil, and there's quite a bit of smelling and sort of some people even taste the soil to get a sense of contents, old school methods. So there's a tactility to that material. I'm not sure how we would get down to that level. Obviously, increasing the haptic interactions with any space creates a value. The sense of sun on your face, the wind direction, that kind of thing would be a fascinating component within these spaces, but perhaps less valuable than the intervisibility of objects and the ability to kind of consider your ergonomics, the actual experience of spaces within these places. Obviously, you know, the smell of eucalyptus wafting up the valley at Montréal would be, very evocative, but perhaps not necessarily informative to the archaeological data at hand. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the next phase would be standing inside some sort of wind chamber, getting a sense of the actual experience itself.
Giles, I have two questions, if you don't mind. One, it's a technical one. And a couple of weeks ago, my students and I read this article by Lindsay Block et al., and it's called, "Is it better to be objectively wrong or subjectively right?" And what it did was test the accuracy and consistency of the Munsell capture gun that,
Right.
Cost like about $700. And it's a really interesting, little article that basically showed that the gun was consistently right within itself, but compared to humans, the colors were pretty off. And so I guess that's been on my mind when thinking about going back into, Anna, I really like that you called it the twin, sort of the digital twin, right, of the excavation unit. And, you know, reconstructing profiles, but knowing that color is actually kind of a big deal. It's actually not as easy to think about. And so I don't know, I guess I wanted to know what analysis, if in terms of analysis, what are some issues? Like, is color an issue? Thinking about Munsell colors, right? And yeah, you can comment on that. And then I have another question after that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the subjectivity of color is incredible, and we rely upon this as a measure in many ways. So, without question, I mean, standing in a stratigraphic profile, you do need to be able to see the grain size of the sand, everything else. But to do that from a line drawing of a stratigraphic profile, that may be all that you have. If you're reinterpreting someone else's in-person experience, looking at these old site reports and the technical materials, there's a lot of trust involved there. You and I would both stand in an excavation profile and draw the stratigraphy slightly different. We would classify the colors completely different. There is no guarantee that we see things the same way. Whereas if we're able to both stand in front of not just the drawings and the photographs and the information that of the quality material that have been collected with great effort, but we're actually able to stand and look at it and reconsider. It's like, well, I don't see it that way, and this is what I see here. It is based upon the quality of the model itself. You can get down to incredible detail, but it may slow down the interaction with the model itself. So there's a bit of a question of, where do you want to draw the line? What's more important, the experience of how two stratigraphic profiles interact with each other over time, or the actual quality itself? But without question, you still need to have some mode of in-person recording. You can't rely upon these models as your only source, but just as a way to return to and reconsider and discuss in a manner that would otherwise be based upon consideration of line drawings. And that can be incredibly powerful way to reconsider ideas and contest previous assumptions.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to sort of see, just like that study, how colors look like, right, in this sort of virtual space with Munsell versus being in person versus the Munsell gun, right? Because if this is the way that things are going to go, maybe to record context faster, it would be interesting to see if there's any kind, I mean, there will be a discrepancy between the two, hands down, based on, like you said, the resolution that you'll see. But it'd be like, for analytical purposes, I think that would be really cool. On the other side of the question I had was maybe one of an ethical one. And something that really sort of I was thinking about a lot while you were talking was that, this is very similar. This is obviously the 3D version of the Wheeler-Kenyon method, right? It's like this really, you're getting all of this data, you're recording a lot, because if you're not there, because as somebody said, once you destroy the archaeological record, it's gone, right? And there's something that always bothered me sort of slightly as an archaeologist, which was, and this is the ethical part, right? Which is paying other people to excavate for you, and you're not the one there. And as a woman in archaeology and someone who has a family, I understand that, because sometimes you can't go because you have a family. But a lot of times I feel like archaeology hasn't changed from when Mortimer Wheeler was there, right? And he was paying natives to excavate, and the Wheeler-Kenyon method was a way to oversee them, right? And capture their work. So it's more, I've been thinking a lot about, and I guess this could be a larger debate about, should archaeologists always be there? Or is this a way for someone who can't be there to obviously be part of the research? But a part of me always sort of thinks that it's also a way to pay other people to do the work for you. And so then you can go back and see it digitally without having been there. And where does that leave the relationships between people, right? Between worker / supervisor, or between graduate student, tenured professor. And so I don't know, I just thought it'd be great to hear your sort of thoughts on that.
Oh yeah, it's a terrifying idea that you just send up your drone to do the work and come back with the data. That's all you're really after.
Well, and I'm more thinking about between people, right? It's like the relationship between people. Even if it was robots, I feel like that would be more ethical. But it's like, I'm going to send out this other person to do it, and I'm going to stay here in the comforts of my home.
Oh,
right?
of course, yeah.
You know,
No, I
but
mean,
yeah,
there is a major danger to that. I mean, the way I see this is it's an additional element to the traditional excavation. However, that happens through complicated colonial relations with particular countries and different systems of excavation strategies. Whether or not it's there's a power dynamic between professors and students, labor requirements. It gets very, very complicated. But this is a layer of accountability. So I would say that this is perhaps a way that you can create data that is able to be distributed and maintained within an academic community as well as within the local community, allowing people to see these materials through their smartphones. This is something that is now, at least in the north coast of Peru, is ubiquitous to have smartphones and be able to show local community members the work that was done that they're not necessarily privy to if they're not available on site at those times. So it's a fantastic opportunity to involve and create an accountability beyond the gray literature of these documents that go to the Ministry of Culture that very few people read, even if they are involved with the excavations on the community level. So allowing us to bring members of community into these spaces, not only through the experience of the places themselves, but as a tool to allow for collaboration outside of these spaces, is something it's a bit of a balancing act. I can't imagine being satisfied by sending out a student to a site, say, excavate it, and Zoom me later and we'll walk around the model. It might be a great additional element if there's no way that I could be there, or if there was a certain question, but it does allow a great continuity of concepts across the board with various different stakeholders. So experts from within Peru, we've been able to send models to them to ask them questions about particular stratigraphic profiles or objects while we're working on those models, in the same way that we would send a photograph or a description to them to get their opinion. This allows for an immediate embodied experience of the context to appreciate the variety of knowledge bases across the board. So definitely an interesting and problematic ethical question, but as I see this perhaps as used as a tool to amplify rather than to redirect labor, essentially.
let's hope so. Giles, I hate to cut you off, but technically the talk is over. And
Okay.
I just, first of all, everybody please give Giles a round of applause for joining us today.
Well, thank you.
And if you all would like to continue to follow his work, his contact info is listed within the chat. You could also find a recording of this talk on the Studio X website. Also, there are more Voices of XR speaker series, and the recordings of previous talks are also on there. Links are in the chat that Megan is putting up right now. Giles, thank you so much. This was incredible, the work that you're doing. So again, let's just everyone give him a round of applause.
Well, thank you very much. And if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm happy to give them a tour in virtual reality too. If you have the access to any sort of hardware, we might be able to set up a bit of a meeting. I can show you this in action. I've given this lecture before entirely in the metaverse, so this is another way to do it, but obviously it becomes very complicated with a triple hybrid kind of format. But yes, please do reach out, and I'd be happy to show you around.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much.
So we have the hardware in Studio X. If anyone needs a headset, we're happy to help you.
Oh, there you go.
We've also
We've
also sent I've sent out a survey for the students to fill out.
Oh,
So,
great.
Thanks, Kathleen.
okay.